Welcome. Thanks for joining us today for the second and final webinar in our series on end-of-year accounting. Today we will be discussing 1099s. A couple of things before we begin. If you look in the Q&A section, you will see a link to part 1 of our year-end series. I have also posted a link to sign up for our monthly email newsletter, which includes the latest accounting news, updates, and announcements. Now let me introduce you to our awesome presenter today. Today we have Jennifer Amos. Jennifer is a member of the Squire outsourced accounting team specializing in 1099s and backup withholding. She loves helping people figure out how to make their technology work for them and easing the burden of tax compliance. So with that, take it away, Jen.
All right, thank you so much. Everybody, welcome to our Taking the Scare Out of 1099s webinar. And with that, we are going to go ahead and get right into what is a 1099. So a 1099 is what's called an information return that's filed with the IRS every year. It's basically to inform the IRS of how much you have paid somebody for their services so that the IRS can take that information and match it with their own tax return. 1099s are based on what you have actually paid out during the year. They are not based on what you have been invoiced by your independent contractors or vendors. With all 1099s, they are always due to the recipients either on January 31st or the next available Monday. The reason why we say that is that this year, January 31st lands on a Sunday, and so they're actually going to be due February 1st this year. Now, I do have some information on here regarding the criteria for the new form, the 1099 NEC, to kind of get you an idea of what the IRS is looking for and how to determine if they may need a 1099. So all the 1099s are pretty much asking, like, have you made a payment to someone who's not your employee? If you have someone who is your employee and you think that they may need a 1099, more likely than not, they're actually going to need the information put on their W-2. It's also asking about services that you paid for that are in the course of your trade or business. This means that one, it's not referring to any goods or products that you've purchased, and it's also not referring to things that are of benefit to you personally. So something that is with regard to you, such as like getting a haircut or, you know, anything that's kind of a personal expense, they do not require 1099s for those. It is really only focused on your business. Also, payments can be made to a group of entities. Individuals can receive 1099s, partnerships, estates. In some cases, a corporation will need a 1099. We'll go into that a little bit further. And then it also needs to be, my apologies. There are minimum thresholds for when you will need to send out a 1099 during the year. Also, with regards to sending out 1099s to the IRS does have different deadlines depending on what forms you're filing as well as how you're filing. So the form 1099 NEC, the non-employee compensation, that's due at the same time to the IRS as when you have to send it out to recipients. So as of January 31st. However, if you're filing the 1099 miscellaneous form by paper, that due date extends out to February 28th. And then the 1099 miscellaneous by electronic transmission to the IRS, those are due on March 31st. So you do have a little bit of time if you're filing a 1099 miscellaneous to be able to correct anything that you get back from your recipients before transmitting it to the IRS. But it's not the case with a lot of the forms that you're going to be filing. So let's actually go into the different forms that we file for 1099s. So the most common form that you're going to be filing this year is the new 1099 NEC. This is a form that has been in use before. It's just been a couple decades before since they've last used it. So it's basically your non-employee compensation. The minimum is $600 unless you have any type of federal or state withholding that you're paying directly to those government entities. If you do have any kind of backup withholding that needs to be reported, the minimum is $0. Basically, any money that you've paid them, you need to report on a 1099 because they need to have the backup withholding on the 1099 as well. So 1099 miscellaneous has still has some boxes that are relevant to many of you. If you have rental payments of over $600 during the year and they're to an entity that requires a 1099, that still goes on the 1099 miscellaneous. If you have any royalty payments of over $10, so a much lower threshold, but if you have any royalty payments, they go on the 1099 miscellaneous. Now, most of you will not have to worry about this, but we do need to highlight what is now the new box 7. It is the notice of free products given to a recipient for them to resell of over $5,000. As you'll see, this is a check mark. They made it so that you can't actually put an amount in that box. If you are one of the rare individuals that do need to use that information, you do not have to file a separate 1099 just to report how much you actually gave them. The IRS specifically states that if you are in that situation, you can send them the 1099 miscellaneous informing the IRS that they've received over $5,000, but then you can actually send a letter to the recipient that received that instead of doing a separate 1099. A few of you will require the next 2 forms, which are the 1099-div, which is short for dividend, and the 1099-int, which is short for interest. So this is if you had to pay at least $10 in either dividends or interest during the year. Now, with regard to the 1099-int, this isn't something that you would send over to your bank for doing like a loan. This is more in the case of if an individual or say a non-incorporated business has loaned your company money and you're paying interest to them, they may require a 1099-int. So here's what the new 1099 miscellaneous form looks like. Box 1 for rents is the same, box 2 for royalties is the same, and as you can see, they completely changed the rest of it. So with box 7, they have that payer made direct sales of $5,000 that I was referring to, and they made it so that you can only do a check mark. If you're trying to file 1099s and you're getting errors because it's not letting you put an amount in box 7, that's because it's on a completely different form now. And that's kind of why the IRS decided to move that box from what it was last year, which was box 9. So with a reminder, with the different boxes, they have different thresholds. So rents is that $600 threshold. Royalties is a $10 threshold. And then if you have the backup, any kind of backup withholding that you're paying directly to the federal government or to the state government on behalf of the recipient, then you will need to report that recipient's portion in box 4 if it's for the federal withholding, and box 15 if it's for state withholding. A majority of you will not need to have information in box 4 or box 15, but it is available if you are in those circumstances where you have to do backup withholding. Now this is the new 1099 NEC. It has what used to be box 7 on the 1099 miscellaneous is now box 1 on the 1099-NEC. And then it also has the option to have the federal income tax withheld as well as the state tax withheld on that same form. If you're wondering why they're showing up on both forms, it's because any kind of reporting that you have for income tax withheld either at the federal or state government, their due dates are based on the same box that they're related to, and the IRS needs to be able to double check those numbers against the full amount of what you were withholding from. And so that's why they're on both forms. And again, for non-employee compensation, your independent contractors, your service vendors, it's that $600 threshold. Now let's go into kind of what makes up non-employee compensation. So it's basically anybody that you paid, whether they're an individual or a company, and this is focused on services. So any payments that you made for products or goods, the IRS does not need to know with regard to the 1099. If they have something like reimbursement, say they're paying a subscription on your behalf to be able to perform the service, you can go ahead and take out the reimbursement that they have requested of you. Also, any payments made through credit cards do not need to go on a 1099, either miscellaneous or NEC, because they are likely going to be separately reported to them by their merchant service company that's handling the credit card. And so if they meet the requirements for having a 1099-K through their merchant service companies, they will go ahead and receive that information through their 1099-K. If you put it on a 1099 miscellaneous or NEC, it is going to double report their income. We have had more questions pop up in the past couple of years regarding things like bank transfers, Venmo, basically any situation where that money is coming out of your banking, out of a bank account, like a checking account, a savings account, that is something that needs to be reported, even if it's through an app or through a debit card. If it's something where it's coming through a credit card, that falls under the 1099-K. Also, a reminder that we like to give people, if someone is receiving a 1099-NEC from you, they should not receive a W-2 from you as well. If they are in one of those rare circumstances where they are going to require both, please be aware the IRS will send you a letter asking you to confirm why they have both. And the reason is both the IRS and several state governments are really cracking down on misclassification of employees versus independent contractors. So please be aware that this will show up as a red flag, and they will send you a letter if somebody has both of those. Okay, so who receives a 1099 NEC? Earlier, I mentioned that some corporations require 1099s, but not all of them. So a sole proprietor or individual, partnership, LLC, those all require 1099s because that is the best way for the IRS to get that information regarding how much has been paid to them. Please keep in mind, LLCs have several different forms that they can take. If they are filing as a corporation, they are actually treated as a corporation for 1099 purposes. So any LLCs filing as an S Corp will not need a 1099, with the exception of lawyers. Unfortunately, lawyers have been targeted, and you always have to file a 1099-NEC for the services that they have provided for you, regardless of whether or not they're a corporation. And then also a 1099 NEC is most commonly sent to distributors. So if you have consultants, distributors, anything like that, they will likely need a 1099 NEC to report their income to the IRS. And then one thing that we urge, if you cannot confirm what kind of company somebody is, it's best to go ahead and send it out. Like if they just tell you they're an LLC, but they don't tell you what type, assume that they're not a corporation and send out that 1099 just to be safe and make sure that you're in compliance. So the best way to gather the information that you need for 1099s is on a Form W-9. It's really easy to find it. All you have to do is Google IRS Form W-9 and it will pull up. You can send it over to your contractors. We recommend that you send it to anybody that you think may hit the $600 threshold during the year, because you never know if it's something like close to the year, if they're going to require 1099, if it's something where you start working with them and you realize that they're really good and you want to keep working with them. It's really helpful because it collects their name, their address, their taxpayer identification number. It confirms what kind of company they are. And then there is that signature certifying that they gave you the correct information. A lot of times if the IRS sends out a penalty letter, the ones that we've been involved in, one of the first things that we ask is, did you collect a Form W-9 from your recipients? Because the IRS will want to make sure that you're actually actively gathering the information to make sure that you're correctly reporting to them. And in all cases, as you're gathering information from your vendors, remember to document everything regarding emails that come in that say, oh, I don't need a 1099 because I'm a corporation. Like, you will want to keep a hold on that so that if there's an IRS audit, you can provide that to the IRS and say, they have informed me they're a corporation, they refuse to give me their W-9, here is what I have on hand. All right, so here is what the W-9 form looks like. It may be a little difficult to see that top line, but it says name as shown on your income tax return. We need to have what they actually file with, not a nickname. It needs to have all of their last names. Middle name is not as important. If for some reason they have you pay under a different name that's not their taxpayer name, that name needs to go under line 2, so that as well, if the IRS is looking through these W-9s and they see one name but not another name, they're going to ask you to, like, why why you're paying one company that you don't have a W-9 for. And while you may say, oh, well, this is their actual name, they could come back and say, well, it doesn't have on the W-9 that that is what they're being paid under. So please make sure that the name that they're being paid under is included on line 2 if it is different from their taxpayer name. If it's something where they have an extra last name that they don't have you write checks to, that's fine. But something where it's like their taxpayer name is John Doe, but they have the name of ABC Company, that definitely needs to be, both of them need to be on the W-9. And then section 3, with all the check marks, that lets you know what kind of company they are, which helps you determine if they will need a 1099. Lines 5 and 6 include their address. And then part 1 is where they need to fill out their social security number or their employer identification number. It should not have both because you're only reporting under one of those ID numbers. So if you get one that comes back with both, make sure that you send it back to them and say, I need to know what you're actually going to file your income under, that the money that I'm sending you to or sending to you. And then of course at the bottom it has a signature certifying that you have all the information. Now, as a best practice, there are some companies that when they start working with contractors, they will warn their contractors, I need you to fill out a Form W-9 before I can even pay you. If you try sending out a W-9 like months down the road, there are quite a few people that will respond and make sure that they actually fill it out, send it back to you, or they may have one on hand that's ready to go. But warning them ahead of time, like, hey, I cannot pay you until I have this information, can make sure that the ones that are likely to fight you about it don't even have a chance. One thing that we recommend as well for companies that have distributors, because it can be rather difficult to make sure that you're gathering, hundreds of new W-9s during the year. One other option, if you can't delay payment, the other option is to tell them, I will have to withhold, or I will have to do backup withholding for you until I receive the completed W-9. And what that means is you would need to withhold 24% of their paycheck, of the paycheck that you would normally give them, like their commissions, and then remit that to the IRS. Now, there are some rules regarding that, and we aren't going to be able to cover them in this training. But if you do have questions regarding backup withholding, I'm more than happy to answer them at a later date because it is a complicated set of rules. And so that is one option, though, if you do have an issue where you're having multiple people who are refusing to give you the information that you need for filing 1099s. Now, a Form W-9 is very helpful, but it also doesn't really verify that it matches what's on the IRS records for them. So the IRS has a free service, which is available through this link, where you can sign up for their program to be able to look up and verify if you're being provided with the full taxpayer name along with their correct taxpayer ID number that goes with that name. The reason why the IRS provides this service throughout the year and why they also make it free is because the IRS is going to double check that information for every 1099 that you file. If they find out that you are missing information, such as if you're missing their taxpayer identification number, or if they find out that there's a mismatch, like for example, say they put a nickname on their W-9, or we have had an instance where somebody accidentally gave us their EIN for another company that they own instead of the company that we were actually paying. And so it's a really good idea to double check because it's not likely that they're purposely giving you incorrect information. They may have just accidentally put incorrect information on there, but the IRS is going to notice. And so in those cases, they will send you a letter called the CP 2100. Usually this follows the 1099 season in September and October. So they'll the ones that they sent out this September and October were for the 2019 tax year that we filed back in January. It's a notice saying, hey, these are the individuals that either have a missing TIN or they have a mismatch. You need to go and collect the correct information from them, because if you continue reporting that information incorrectly and you're not doing backup withholding, then we will likely have to penalize you. And we have seen them send out more letters. They've been sending them out for the 2018 tax year. Because again, they're going to wait for the second year. The first year, they'll just warn you. The second year, if you file with that same information and you're not doing backup withholding, they are going to send you a penalty letter. All right, so let's move on to QuickBooks, although I am going to double check and see. Okay, we don't have any questions. All right, so we're now going to move into QuickBooks since this is an area that we commonly help our clients with. So if you want to file your 1099s, or if you want to be able to pull reports for 1099 vendors from QuickBooks, you'll want to make sure that you actually map the information in QuickBooks. So if you're in QuickBooks Desktop, you actually have to turn a setting on before you have the ability to do anything else. So you'll need to go into Edit, Preferences, and Tax 1099. And then from there, you'll need to say, yes, I do file 1099 forms. Even though it says miscellaneous on this, basically any 1099 forms, they're going to need you to say yes on. And then you have the option either to access the 1099 wizard directly from the settings page, or you can access it from the vendors menu. As you can see down under print/e-file 1099s, there's a bunch of reports as well as the 1099 wizard. QuickBooks Online is a little bit different. They basically have that information without turning on a setting. So all you have to do is go into the vendor section of QBO, and they have up at the top that prepare 1099s. Now this screen also shows part of the 1099 wizard for QBO. It is kind of a similar process with QuickBooks Desktop, which is why we don't have a screenshot here, but basically it's going to verify your company information. It will ask you to confirm that, yes, we have the right address for you, we have the correct EIN for you, and then it will move on to what accounts do you want to map within QuickBooks that have to do with the 1099s that you're reporting. And then it will also ask you to go through your contractors and make sure that you have all the information ready for them. Prior to January, we recommend only doing steps 1 through 3. If you move on to step 4, that's when it will ask you to review. And step 5 is when you actually submit through QuickBooks. So please only do 1 through 3 up until you're ready to actually file through QuickBooks. But again, you don't actually have to file through QuickBooks. We're going to go through that a little bit later. But this is all the prep work that you need to do to be able to get the 1099 reports in your system. Another important aspect of making sure that you have the information ready in your QuickBooks file is that you need to enter in the W-9 information. So in both systems, you enter that information into the vendor section. So you will tell them in QBO, they label it as the business ID number, which is where you put in either the EIN or the social security number. And then you'll want to mark to track payments for 1099. For QuickBooks Desktop, it's a similar thing where you go into their vendor profile, you click on settings, tax settings, and then again, it's called the vendor tax ID. It's either their employer identification number or their social security number, and you'll need to mark that they're eligible for a 1099. One very important thing to remember is that if you are going to file your 1099s through QuickBooks, you absolutely have to have this information in these fields in order for it to populate on their 1099s. Now, I know that there is a little bit of a security concern with this information. If you are concerned about the fact that basically anybody who has access to your QuickBooks file can look at this information, you basically have two options. One of them is that you enter in the information just before you go and actually file the 1099s, and then you take it out as soon as they've been filed. Or you can use a third-party software or an outsourced accounting firm like Squire to help you with preparing 1099s if you don't want to have this information stored in QuickBooks. So accounts to map. So these are the different kinds of expenses that you need to make sure you have mapped in order to file your 1099s. So the one that I don't have listed on here is the 1099 miscellaneous. So the ones that are rent expense for box 1. If you have royalties, if you can have a royalty expense, that will make it easier to map as well. But for the 1099 NEC that most of you are dealing with, you're looking for accounts that have names like consulting, contract labor, marketing, legal fees, professional fees. These are all expenses that are focused on services that have been provided to you. Some accounts that are very rarely non-employee compensation are things like utility, telephone, bank service fees. These are 3 areas where it is incredibly rare for those companies to not be corporations. Not that there aren't some that might not be corporations, but it is incredibly rare, and the IRS has noticed that they are incredibly rare. So most likely those do not need to be mapped. And then things like job materials and office supplies, those ones are rarely mapped as well because they are for goods, not services. All right, so let's actually get into the filing of 1099s. So the first thing that you'll want to do is you'll want to make sure that you have all the information that you need to file 1099s. So if you've gone through, turn on the setting if you need to, and then mapped your accounts, and then made sure that all of your vendor information is in there. Depending on your QuickBooks file and subscription, you may have access to 1099 reports. There's one called the 1099 summary where you can just get the name and the amounts, along with their taxpayer ID that you've put in there. There's also the option to pull a 1099 transaction detail report that will actually look at what items are actually pulling in underneath each vendor. If you're using QBO Essentials, they don't have 1099 reports available. Or if it's something where you don't feel comfortable putting the information into your QuickBooks file and you're actually going to be having you're going to be processing 1099s outside of QuickBooks, another option is to pull what's called the expenses by vendor report. Just make sure that it's for the year, and then you will pull up all the vendors, and you can usually what I'll do is I'll pull it into an Excel file. That way I can make notes saying, okay, this vendor doesn't need a 1099 because it's a corporation. This vendor doesn't need one because it's all goods that I've purchased. And then that way I can double check year to year what vendors actually need to have 1099s and which ones don't. For all of these forms, normally for QuickBooks, whatever setting you have regarding if you're reporting on cash basis or accrual basis is the default for when you pull these reports. So please remember that you need to switch it over to cash basis before you start, because the cash basis is what the IRS is looking for, and you just want to double check and make sure that that's actually the report that you're looking at. If you don't know where that setting is, it is up by the dates, and it'll have both accrual and cash on it, and you'll just need to click on the little button that's next to cash. So for all the vendors that you've pulled up in these reports that you know that you're going to have to file 1099s for, you're going to want to make sure that you have their taxpayer name, their taxpayer ID. You'll want to make sure that you have a current address for them. And then of course you want to make sure that you have the right amount paid that you're going to be reporting on 1099s. Now we're going to get a little bit into federal versus state filings. Last year this wasn't as big of a deal, but with 1099 and -NEC, it has become a rather surprising development. So the IRS came out. They've been aware that they're going to be doing this form for a couple of years. They've been, telling us, hey, prepare 2 different 1099 miscellaneous forms because eventually we're going to have the information on separate forms. So, get into the practice of it. And then they delivered a big surprise, which was that they are not going to be transmitting the information of the 1099-NEC to the states that participate in the combined federal state filing program. This means that depending on where your recipients are located, they may actually need to have both a federal and a state 1099 filed on their behalf. As such, there are a lot of programs like ADP or Gusto where if you are paying contractors and they notice that it's in a state that may require that additional report, they have actually started alerting individuals to this new requirement. Well, they're not saying that it has to do with the combined federal state filing program. They're just saying we now need to have this information if you want to be able to file 1099s to this state. Now, not all states are going to require 1099 be separately filed with them. For example, Utah has not been part of the combined federal state filing program for the last 2 years. And part of that is because the only time that they want a 1099 NEC to be sent to them directly is if you have state backup withholding that needs to be reported. So unless you have been paying money directly to the state of Utah on behalf of one of your contractors, you will not need to worry about filing a separate 1099 to the state of Utah. And again, this is based on where your recipients are located, not where you're located. And so if you do have recipients that are located out of state, we strongly recommend that you double check the list of states on the Combined Federal State Filing Program. All you have to do is Google IRS Publication 1220 and make sure that it's for 2020. It is on page 24. It's just a box that has the different states on there. So with this, we've tried double checking with QuickBooks regarding if QuickBooks is ready to do state filings. It likely will not be able to do to file directly with any states because again, there's 50 states. They all have their own individual reporting programs. So we are going to talk a little bit about what to do if you think that you may need to do a separate 1099 to a state. But we wanted to make sure you were aware of it and be aware of the rules specifically in Utah. Now, there can be different reporting requirements depending on if you're filing electronically versus paper. So electronic filing can be done through QuickBooks, through different third-party softwares, one of which we'll be going over in a moment, or through your accountant. Squire files 1099s on a regular basis. For ones that are done through, that are handled electronically, they do make it easy to print those 1099s to recipients on regular paper. You don't have to have any fancy paper to send it out to recipients. It also does not require a Form 1096. A Form 1096 is a reconciliation that the IRS uses to make sure that they have every paper that has come in. So when it's filed electronically, that information is sent to them digitally, and so they don't actually require a Form 1096. If you have over 250 recipients during a tax year, the IRS is going to require you to file electronically. Now, the reason why I said in a tax year is because if you file 100, like say you file 200 recipients on time in January to the IRS, and then you find out that you missed 40. When you submit those additional 40 to the IRS is going to count all of those submissions and see that you went over the 250 threshold. And if they were filed on paper, even though they were two separate batches, the IRS will send you a penalty letter saying that you filed incorrectly and that you filed all of them incorrectly. So please be very careful if you're even close to that 200 threshold or the 250 threshold. If you're getting close to 200, I'd recommend you file electronically just to be on the safe side. And it's also a lot more convenient. Another thing to keep in mind is if you do have to send a 1099 directly to a state, there are some states that will not allow you to file by paper. Again, going back to Utah will not accept anything but electronic submissions for 1099s. It doesn't matter how many you're filing. Any paper 1099s that they receive will go immediately into the shred bin. Now, if you do decide that you're going to file 1099s through paper, you have to meet a couple different requirements. One of the requirements is that you absolutely have to have a Form 1096. Again, they want to make sure that they have everything if you're filing it through paper. The copy that you send to the IRS has to be on their special red page printout. They will not accept anything on the black ink page. They will not accept it being printed on regular paper. It has to be on a specific type of paper, and it has to be the one that has the red ink on it. And again, it must be for fewer than 250 recipients during the year. Something to keep in mind, if you do submit through QuickBooks and you submit 1099s after April, QuickBooks only does paper filing after April. So it's very important to keep that in mind if you are filing by paper and you are filing through QuickBooks. All right, so let's go over some corrections because it's definitely a possibility that you find out from one of your recipients that, oh, actually, this is how much you paid me, or, oh, I actually need you to report it under this other entity. And so we need you to be aware that there's a couple different types of ways to correct 1099s. And also we need to let you know why they're a little different. So if you have to update the taxpayer name or their taxpayer ID number, the IRS basically uses those two pieces of information to connect those with a separate income tax return that either a company or an individual is filing. And so if you end up having that incorrect match between the two, or even if it's something, like I said, where maybe they tell you, actually, I need it to be reported under a separate entity. The first form that you need to file that's the correction is to actually remove the amount from that incorrect name and TIN. So basically you'll file a second 1099 with the check mark saying corrected, but you'll have the amount in the same box that you originally reported as 0. Then you'll have to file a second form that has that correct name and taxpayer identification number with the correct amount in the box that you had just reported. It is a little annoying, but that's the reason why the IRS puts a lot of emphasis on making sure that you have the correct name and taxpayer ID to begin with. Now, if you need to update the amount, the IRS does not need you to send 2 forms. They just need the 1 form. You'll want to mark the corrected up at the top and just put the correct amount in that section. If it is something where you need to move it from, say, rents to from a rent to royalties, likely not going to happen. But if it's something where you just need to move the box, then you'll put 0 in the box that it was put in that it shouldn't have been put in, and you want to put the amount in the correct box. Now, the IRS does not need to know of any address changes. So say if you send out a 1099 to the incorrect address, it comes back in the mail. The IRS does not need to have you correct the address. They aren't as concerned with that because they'll have the income tax to see what their address is. Another important thing to know as well, if you have to do corrections, QuickBooks does not have an option to do correction. They can send out the original 1099 file. They do not have the ability to mark it corrected, unfortunately. So, between these issues regarding the potential state filings, needing corrections, we're going to talk a little bit about a software called Tax 1099. Now, with this software, it's actually partnered with both Intuit and with Squire for several years now. Part of why we love it is because they keep on top of everything. They're in constant contact with the states, constant contact with the IRS, as well as they work with different accounting softwares. It actually directly connects with any QuickBooks Desktop or QuickBooks Online account. If you prefer to keep the information outside of QuickBooks, or you don't need to have the information in QuickBooks, you do have the option to do an Excel upload directly into Tax 1099. They file different kinds of forms. They can do 1099s, W-2s, any of the reconciliation forms. It also helps in areas that QuickBooks currently can't do. For example, it can do corrections. It has the ability of letting you know, hey, this state needs to have a separate 1099. Can we file this on your behalf? It is for a nominal fee. But they will make sure that it is filed correctly following that state's requirements. And then also, if you just want to go onto their website to look at information regarding the different states, they do have it available at that website of www.tax1099.com. So this is a screenshot of the page that they have regarding the different forms that they can file. As far as I know, it is not possible to do a 1099 INT or 1099 div on QuickBooks if you file through QuickBooks directly. Tax 1099 does have that information. They also have, as you can see, 1099s that you didn't even know existed, along with some other forms as well. This is the input screen. If you're manually entering it in, you would put your payer information up at the top, the recipient's information down at the bottom. It saves this information from year to year. So if you have one 1099 that you know that you're going to file every year, it's really easy to just quickly go in, double check the information, enter in what their compensation is this year, and then save and file. And as you can see up at the top, they have that corrected box that you just check mark. If you have more than 10 recipients that you need to file, we recommend doing an import bulk data, which is where you click on that. It will give you an Excel template that you can use. You fill out that information, and then you can easily upload a whole batch of 1099s that you need to file. Another thing with Tax 1099 is that they make it easy to manage the information from year to year. As you can see from the different buttons, there's options to sync directly to different types of accounting systems. You can manage W-9s in here. You can do TIN verifications in here. If you do a TIN verification, it will actually keep that information from year to year. So you can double check and make sure that, if there's any that you haven't verified yet, they're easy to spot. And then also, as you can see, there's that email ID option where you can securely email 1099s directly to the recipient. So some additional features, they do handle vendor management. They can do TIN verifications for you without you requiring a separate IRS TIN verification login. There is also an option to send a request for W-9s directly to your recipients from Tax 1099, and then they will hold that information for you. They are constantly updating the software. They're constantly talking with the states, making sure that they have everything up to date. As we mentioned, quite a while back, with the IRS, so even though the dates to recipients again are on January 31st or the next available day, if it's over the weekend, there is that option to schedule the filings to go out to the IRS at a later date. So you can get all the 1099s ready, send them to the recipients, and yet not have to send them to the IRS until the actual due date. It also has the ability to securely email the 1099s to recipients. The emails, we've noticed the first time that people use them, it can get a little confusing. There are some instructions on there, but when somebody gets used to that 1099 email, we've had some great responses with people accepting 1099 delivery through their email. Another thing that I haven't written on here is that Tax 1099 can also mail your 1099s out for you through a fee. If you do use that option, please keep in mind, though, that they stop mailing a few days ahead of the 31st, just to make sure that they can get everything already in their queue mailed out. It does integrate directly with different kinds of accounting software. On that screen, you may have noticed it didn't have QuickBooks Desktop on the recipient screen. However, it does connect with QuickBooks Desktop. It also connects with Xero, Entrada, FreshBooks, Zoho, as well as Sage Tact. And they've been basically working with a bunch of different accounting software to see how they can connect and make sure that they make it as painless as possible to file your 1099s. They also have quick support through a chat feature that lets you go ahead and ask questions from people directly at Tax 1099. And with that, we'll go ahead and enter the Q&A. Please feel free to post any questions to the chat, and I will be happy to answer those.
Okay, well, it doesn't look like we have any questions coming in. Thank you, Jennifer, so much for presenting today, and thank you all for joining us. We'll be sending out the slides and a recording of this session just a little bit later today, so you can watch out for those. Thanks again.